Welcome back, everyone, or welcome for the first time. If it's your first time, we're so happy to be learning with you all today. This is the second session of Becoming Elijah, Prophet of Transformation with Professor Daniel Matt. We would like to extend our gratitude to Mr. Alan Mansfield for his sponsorship of this class in honor of Professor Matt and his world-renowned work on the Zohar. A bit of my digital housekeeping. Those of you who are joining us here on Zoom will receive an invitation to become a panelist. If you choose to accept it, that will let you into the room, so to speak, so that you can share your smiling face on camera if you wish, but you don't have to. It will also enable you to unmute yourself when Professor Matt invites questions. It makes engagement a little easier. But we do ask that if you do come into the room, please stay muted when you are not meaning to share something. Dogs bark, babies cry, life happens, but it can make things a little difficult to hear on Zoom. If you prefer to type questions into the chat, or if you're joining us on Facebook Live, you can put questions and comments in the comment section directly below the video. I'm very happy to keep track of them, and you can either share them when we have time for question and answer, or I'm happy to read them out for you. So this week, we will continue our study of the prophet Elijah, turning now to sources in the Talmud and Kabbalah that transform him into a compassionate hero and source of wisdom. So without further ado, Professor Matt, please.
Thank you. Wonderful to be with you again. We're exploring this multifaceted figure, Eliyahu Hanavi, and we're going to move now from the biblical Elijah to his post-biblical career. I'm going to screen share for a good deal of the time, and I think many of you have this PDF, but we'll look at it together. I want to start page 4, something we ended with last week. You remember Eliyahu is taken up to heaven in a fiery chariot, and Elisha sees his mentor being carried away. Elisha actually tears his clothes, which is a sign that, at least for Elisha feels that Elijah has died. And it's really an open question whether the book of Kings is telling us that Elijah has died or that he has escaped death. It's really an open question. But if we look at another passage in the Bible, we looked at this last time from Malachi. This is page 4, number 7. Hinei anochi sholeach lachem et Eliyah Hanavi. Right here he's called Eliyah rather than Eliyahu. Eliyah Hanavi lifnei bo yom Hashem hagadol v'hanora. Okay, look, I'm sending to you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the day of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Great and awesome. V'heshiv lev avot al banim v'lev banim al avotam, etc. He will bring fathers' hearts back to their children and children's hearts to their fathers. So Malachi, he's writing around the year 500 BCE. The Israelites have begun to come back from Babylonian exile sometime earlier. And Malachi is conveying this prophecy. God is speaking through the prophet as usual, as unusual. And Elijah is going to be sent. So that must mean that Elijah is available. Maybe it means that God is going to resurrect Elijah, but Malachi doesn't say that. Elijah, it seems, is available in heaven. He's been taken up to heaven, and now he can come down from heaven to prepare the way to announce the coming of what? Yom Hashem, the day of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. The rabbis take this to mean the Mashiach, and it's certainly not very far from notions of Mashiach. So that really sets the stage for the transformation that we're going to explore now. Before we look at the next text, I just want to say something, a few words for preparation. Some people actually say that there are two different characters, Elijah the prophet and Eliyahu Hanavi. Now, of course, they're one and the same, but what that statement means is that the Elijah we know from the Bible is, as we saw last week, a zealot, almost a fanatic, right? He's obsessed with Hashem. He's fighting for the glory, the honor of Hashem. He's an extremist. He certainly has a violent side. He slaughters 450 prophets of Baal. But somehow, when we find Elijah in the Talmud and the Midrash, it seems to be a very different character. It seems to be a loving, compassionate, redemptive figure. What does this have to do with the Elijah of the Bible? That's really what we're exploring. And we're really now at the moment of transition from the Bible to Rabbinic Judaism. So what do the rabbis, what's their attitude toward Elijah? Some of them are critical of Elijah. Now, it's strange to be critical of a biblical prophet, of a biblical hero, but remember, Elijah is something of a zealot, and the rabbis have a problem with zealotry. The rabbis have a problem with zealots. Why is that? Mainly because the temple was destroyed in the year 70, partly because of the zealots, right? The Jews might have been able to make peace with the Romans, but the extremists among the Jews, the actual political party called the Zealots, they refused to make any compromise with Rome, and they fought for maintaining the purity of Israelite worship. They wanted no desecration, they wanted no interference on the part of Rome. So it was really the Zealots that made it impossible for Rome and the kingdom of Judea to make peace. I'm not saying that they would have made peace, but there would have been a chance, but the Zealots ruined that chance. And the rabbis are aware of that in the following centuries after the destruction, after the year 70. And that explains part of their opposition to zealotry, both the zealotry of Pinchas earlier in the Torah and the zealotry of Eliyahu. So who does Elijah become? Who does Eliyahu become in the Talmud and the Midrash? He becomes a kind of super rabbi. He is someone who studies Torah, who teaches Torah, who engages with the rabbis in exploring Torah. He's no longer this stark figure railing against the Jewish people. He's promoting Torah and Ma'asim Tovim. He's promoting good deeds. He's promoting mitzvot. He's still an extremist, but now he's an ethical extremist. Now he channels his zeal into ethics. For example, Elijah will meet with certain rabbis. He'll encounter rabbis in the marketplace or in the house of study, but then all of a sudden he'll stop meeting with that rabbi. He won't show up any longer. He won't encounter the rabbi any longer. Why? Because the rabbi might have done the tiniest misdeed possible. That figure, that rabbi might have done something very mildly unethical or just questionable, just questionably unethical. Because of that, Elijah will stop coming. So he becomes an ethical extremist. He's also a shapeshifter. In other words, he can take on the form of almost any character imaginable in order to carry out one task or another. Let's look back at the text now and see an example of this. So we're in the PDF on page 5. Let's take a look at the story. This one we'll look at in English. A man named Nahum of Gamzo, or Nahum of Gimzo. He's considered a miraculous figure in the Talmud. So look at this story from the Talmud. We're trying to explain why was he given this name, Nahum of Gamzo. Actually, we should look up a little bit here. Take a look at this paragraph. You have it in front of you. One time Elijah made an appearance before the Roman emperor. He did so in the company of the sage Nahum of Gimzo. Okay, that's really his name. Nahum from the town of Gimzo. In a pun on this place name, Nahum became known as Nahum of Gamzo. Okay, Gimzo is the name of a town. What is Gamzo? Gamzo means this too, because he always used to say, Gamzo l'tova. This too is for the good. If something bad happens to you, don't fall into depression. Gamzo l'tova. This too will turn out for the good. So that's how Nachum of Gimzo became Nachum of Gamzo. Why was he called Nachum of Gamzo? Because whatever happened to him, he would say Gamzo L'tova. You can pronounce that word zo or zu, but in Rabbinic Hebrew it's zo, Gamzo L'tova. Let's do it for the best. Once the Jews wished to send a gift to the emperor. Okay, the Jews had to curry favor with the ruler in Rome, and there were Jews who would make that journey from Palestine to Rome to help things move along. Once the Jews wished to send a gift, they said, who should go? Let Nachum of Gamzo go, for he's experienced in miracles. Beautiful phrase. In Hebrew, it's milumad b'nisim. He's learned in miracles. He's had a lot of experience in miracles. They sent with him a chest full of jewels and pearls. He set out, and he spent the night at a certain inn. During the night, the occupants of the inn arose and emptied the chest and filled it with earth. In the morning, when Nachum saw what had happened, he said, Gamzo L'tova. Right, this too is for the good. When he reached his destination, they opened the chest and saw that it was full of earth. Okay, in Rome, the king, meaning the emperor, then wanted to kill all of them, all the Jewish emissaries, or maybe all the Jews, saying the Jews are mocking me. Here, they're bringing me a present of dirt. Nachum said, Gamzo L'tova. Elijah came and appeared before the emperor as one of his ministers. Okay, here is the shapeshifter. He doesn't show up and say, I'm Eliyahu Hanavi. He pretends to be, he impersonates a Roman minister. He said to the emperor, perhaps this is some of the earth that their father Abraham. For when Abraham threw earth against the enemy, it turned into swords. And when he threw stubble, it turned into arrows. Okay, Abraham was involved in a battle against a number of kings to rescue his nephew Lot. And the Midrash says that he was able to turn, his dust was magic. His dust could defeat any enemy. Now, there was a certain province that the Romans were unable to conquer. When they tried throwing some of this earth against that province, they conquered it. So they went into the royal treasury and filled Nachum's chest with jewels and pearls and sent him off with great honor. Okay, Eliyahu can become anyone. Eliyahu will save the day. There's something here too about Eliyahu mocking the enemies of the Jews, right? He saves the Jewish people by performing a trick, a miraculous trick. And this is who he's become. He's a hero. Look at this next story. This is another example of Elijah as a shapeshifter, a story about Rabbi Meir, who was a great sage of the messianic period. Meir had rescued his sister-in-law, who was condemned to slavery in a Roman brothel. Okay, Meir was able to rescue her, basically by bribing the guard at the jail. But then the Romans wanted to capture Meir. So they put his picture, they put a wanted picture on the gates of Rome. They went and engraved Rabbi Meir's image at the entrance of Rome and proclaimed, anyone who sees this face, bring him. One day some Roman officers saw him and ran after him. He ran away from them. Some say that Elijah appeared to the Roman pursuers as a prostitute and embraced Rabbi Meir. The pursuers said, heaven forbid, if this were Rabbi Meir, he wouldn't have done that. Okay, so this is unusual. Elijah is actually pretending to be a harlot in order to save Rabbi Meir. If Elijah embraces Rabbi Meir, the Romans realized this couldn't be Rabbi Meir. So Elijah is able to do the unexpected, to break the rules in order to rescue those in trouble. He's also a member of the Heavenly Academy, what's called the Yeshiva Shamala. Elijah participates in the discussions in the Heavenly Academy. In that academy, God is the teacher. And who are the students? The students are the souls of the righteous. So God is teaching Torah to the souls of the departed righteous. But Elijah shows up there too. I'm sure many of you know the story. Let me share it for a second here. There's a wonderful story in the Talmud, a very famous story, I'm sure many of you know, about a debate the rabbis have. It's a debate about a very technical matter, what's known as the oven of Achnai. We don't have to go into all the details here, but the basics are that this oven is made out of concentric rings of clay, of hardened clay. And the question comes up, is that kind of oven made out of these layers, circles of clay piled on top of each other, is that kind of oven subject to impurity? Can that become ritually impure? Rabbi Eliezer took the view that it cannot become impure, but the majority of the rabbis said that it can become impure. So that sets the stage for this story. I'm reading from my book, page 66. This is a famous story in the Talmud. It has been taught. On that day, Rabbi Eliezer brought forward all the arguments in the world, but they did not accept them. Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if the halacha is as I say, let this carob tree prove it. The carob tree was uprooted from its place, and it moved a distance of 100 cubits. Some say 400 cubits. They responded, one does not bring proof from a carob tree. The carob tree returned to its place. Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if the halacha is as I say, let the aqueduct prove it. The water in the aqueduct flowed backwards. They responded, one does not bring proof from water. The water returned to its place. Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if the halacha is as I say, let the walls of the academy prove it. The walls of the academy inclined and were about to fall. Here Rabbi Eliezer is so sure that he's right. He says, let this house of study collapse. So the walls were about to fall, but Rabbi Yoshua rebuked them, saying, when scholars grapple with one another in a halachic dispute, what does it have to do with you? It has been taught the walls did not fall in deference to Rabbi Yoshua, but they did not stand upright, deference to Rabbi Eliezer. They still remain inclined. Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if the halacha is as I say, let it be proved from heaven. A heavenly voice issued, saying, what do you have against Rabbi Eliezer, since the halacha agrees with him everywhere? Okay, a divine voice has come out of heaven saying Eliezer is right. You would think that should finally turn the tide, but Rabbi Yoshua arose and said, it is not in heaven. Lo vashamayim hi. Right, a verse from Deuteronomy, it's not in heaven. What does this mean? Rabbi Yirmiyah said, one pays no attention to a heavenly voice. Since God has already given the Torah to us at Mount Sinai, and it's written, follow the majority. It's an amazing story that shows you the boldness of rabbinic interpretation. The rabbis dare to say, we are going to determine the halacha based on our discussions. And even if a voice comes from heaven saying you got it wrong, we're not going to follow that because the Torah has been given to us. Now it's in our hands. It's an amazingly powerful statement on the boldness of rabbinic creativity. But the story doesn't end there. For us, the important part comes now. Rabbi Natan encountered Elijah. Okay, we don't know if this was some time later. Rabbi Natan encountered Elijah and asked him, what did the Blessed Holy One do at that moment? How did God react? How did God react when Rabbi Yoshua said, we don't listen to a heavenly voice? How did God react? I'm sure many of you know the answer. Eliyahu replied, God laughed and smiled and said, my children have defeated me. My children have defeated me. Amazing story. The end. What does that mean? My children have defeated me. God is saying, I gave the Torah and now they're telling me what it means. God, it's almost like a parent being bested by the daughter, right? What parent is not overjoyed when the child teaches the parent something? So somehow God is praising this fact, but what's important to us is what? How do we know that? How do we know what God feels? Because of Eliyahu. Eliyahu is the one who can convey what's going on in God's mind or in God's heart. No one else could. The rabbis don't know how God reacted. Rabbi Natan doesn't know how God reacted. He asks Elijah, Elijah knows. Elijah knows the inner workings of the divine mind. This is already in the Talmud. You could say it's already in the Bible. The prophet knows something of the divine mind, right? The prophet conveys the divine will, but here we're talking about a spontaneous discovery, and Elijah's response is really phenomenal here. Let's pause just for a minute or two if there's a question in the chat or if someone wants to ask a question. It's great to have a live question, so please, if anyone is wondering about something, unmute yourself and feel free.
Jeffrey, it looks like you've had your hand up for a while, so feel free to unmute. Go ahead.
Yeah, really two comments. The first, when you started and talked about the rejection of zealots, it did remind me, and is reminiscent of the way the Maccabees have been treated. There's a lot of controversy over that because while it's a holiday, it's not included. They were seen as terrorists by one faction, and another faction, of course, they were, great heroes. So at some point, I suspect you could comment on that. But the second comment I have, which is a little bit more mature as you've spoken, is, the reliance on God as a parent is changing over time. And that story you just told is God is still a parent, but he's a proud parent that his children are doing better than him. And at some point, we're not going to hear the voice of God as it was in Torah. We're simply going to have to live our lives the best we can with the sense that we are in some way reflecting God.
Yeah, very interesting. First, the zealotry, yeah, it's interesting that could apply as well to the Maccabees. The rabbis are uncomfortable with violent behavior that could ruin the current harmony, or semi-harmony with ruling powers. In terms of, yeah, you're really in the second part, the second comment you made, this is really the evolution of God, right? God evolves through Jewish history, through Jewish thought. What I mean is the way we imagine God changes, and that, to trace that even in the Torah itself, right? The way God is depicted in Deuteronomy is not exactly the same as the way God is depicted in Genesis, right? There's already a development there. For example, dveikut, cleaving to God, right? Never in the Torah does it say cleave to God until we come to the book of Deuteronomy. It seems it's impossible to cleave to God, right? God is fire. No human can see me and live. How can you have intimate contact with God? Deuteronomy says you should cleave to God 5 or 6 times. It says it. So it's actually one of the mitzvot according to certain counts. So God changes as Jewish thought changes, as Jewish history changes. I mean by that, of course, God doesn't change and God does change. You could say ultimately God does not change, but the way we perceive God changes, which means that for us, God changes. Let's have a question from Dave and then Joel, and I think we'll go back to the text, please.
Thank you. If it's not too distracting, I was interested if you could say more about Eliah versus Eliyahu and the difference when someone has a different name, as we saw from Avram and Avraham and Sarai and Sarah. It's fundamental to refer to somebody differently.
Yes, yeah. Usually that's the case, and we'll come to the question of Eliyahu and Pinchas hopefully later today if we have time. But here, there's really no difference between Eliyahu and Eliah, right? What is Yah? What is Yahu? Yah and Yahu are both abbreviations for Yud He Vav He. So my God is Yah or my God is Yahu. It's really the same. It's only a couple times in the Bible, I think maybe 3 times in the whole Bible, that you have Eliah. Every other time it's Eliyahu. Even in the book of Kings, I think there's one place where it says Eliah. But throughout Kings, it's almost always Eliyahu. And in this verse in Malachi, it's Eliah. Christians refer to Elijah as Elias, Elias. So in a way, Eliah is close to Elias, but in terms of their meaning, you could say they're identical. Joel, please.
Well, first of all, Pinchas, I've heard rabbis, especially modern Orthodox rabbis, trying to show how Pinchas was not a good guy, that basically did all sorts of, some people would say gymnastics, God made him go have more duties in the Mishkan so that his anger would be sublimated because of his, and the rabbis, some rabbis have problems with Pinchas. He was a zealot. As far as Eliyahu, just growing up, I mean, the rabbis would tell us that when Mashiach came, he would be coming down the chariot, and we were kids, and we literally believed that we would look up in the sky and we'd see his chariot, and Elijah would come down. And especially going to slichot, to shul, like early in the morning before it was still dark, and there was always this idea that this is all folk religion, I guess, that there would be spirits of the dead, and there was almost this expectation, half an expectation that somehow Eliyahu would show up. It wasn't stated, but all these holy things were going to happen.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's really the transformation. Now, why do we think that? Why do we feel that? Why do we connect Eliyahu with Mashiach? Because of that verse in Malachi, right? I'm going to send Eliyahu before Yom Hashem. The rabbis took that to mean Eliyahu will announce the Mashiach. He will come one day before the Mashiach, or according to other accounts, 3 days before the Mashiach, or they'll come together. The point is, you can't have the Mashiach without Eliyahu. Now, this is very interesting because in a way you could say one of Eliyahu's great contributions was that he enabled Jews to more easily expect the Mashiach. What I mean by that is, how can you picture Mashiach, right? Christians can picture Mashiach pretty easily, right? For Christians, the identity of the Mashiach is not hard to define, right? But for a Jew, what's the Messiah look like? Who's he going to be? Is it going to be King David? Is he going to look like this? We don't know. But Elijah, we somehow can picture. Elijah is going to bring the Mashiach. He's going to pave the way for Mashiach. So it makes perfect sense, as you were saying, to expect Elijah as the one who will bring Mashiach. It's too hard to picture Mashiach, but at least we can picture Eliyahu. So from now on, from Malachi on, Eliyahu and Mashiach are inextricably linked. Let's go back to, and we'll look actually at some texts about that. What's going to happen when Mashiach comes? Let's look on page 7 now. Number 4. I'm skipping some of this material, and obviously you can all explore it on your own. Okay, number 4. When Elijah returns to herald the arrival of Mashiach, what will he do? What will he actually do? He'll clarify halachic doubts, explain problematic verses, and harmonize rabbinic disputes, thereby restoring peace. Okay, so the one who had his violent moments, he's now going to be the one of peace. This is a transformation, right, from the fierce zealot to the one who's going to bring messianic peace. This is a discussion in the Mishnah, okay, the oldest document of Rabbinic Judaism, oldest canonical document. This is in the Mishnah, at the end of Mishnah Eduyot. Rabbi Yeshua said, I've received a tradition from Rabban Yochanan, son of Zakkai, who heard from his teacher, and his teacher from his teacher, as a halacha, okay, which really means here not a law, but as a tradition given to Moses at Sinai, that Elijah will not come to declare pure or impure. What does that mean? In other words, Elijah's not going to be involved in making a halachic decision, but he's going to give you enough information that you'll know the true state of affairs. We'll see an example of this in a moment. Rabbi Shimon says, this is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the great hero of Kabbalah and a great figure in the time of the Mishnah, one of the students of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shimon says, Elijah will come to harmonize disputes. Okay, the Hebrew here is beautiful, lahashvot hamachloket, to even out the machloket, to harmonize disputes. If two rabbis disagree in the Talmud, Elijah will find a way to harmonize. Now, this is beautiful. What was Elijah's role in the Bible? Not to harmonize disputes, to make a dispute, right? What does Elijah say to the Israelites? You have to choose. Stop hopping between the two branches. Decide who is God. Is it Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh or Baal? Now Elijah is going to make peace between different views. And the sages say to make peace in the world, right? La'asot shalom ba'olam. Beautiful, simple Hebrew. La'asot shalom ba'olam, to make peace in the world. Now, what's the proof of that? Again, the verse from Malachi. Look, I'm sending to you Elijah the prophet. He will bring fathers' hearts back to children and children's hearts back to their fathers. Okay, you might say that's the ultimate messianic act, right? To restore family harmony, to overcome, right, whatever squabbles or animosity there is. That's what Eliyahu will do. He is the one who will bring peace to the world. Now look at this. This is fascinating. A little bit of halachic detail. We actually have the phrase in the Talmud and in the Mishnah, Ad sheyavo Eliyahu, until Elijah comes. Let's look at an example. I'll move to the English to make it a little easier. This is from the Mishnah, from Bava Metzia. This is on the next page now, number 5, from page 8, the top of page 8. If two people deposited money with a third, one of them depositing 100 zuz and the other 200 zuz, and afterward one says the 200 is mine and the other says the 200 is mine. Okay, they both claim to be the one who lent 200, but obviously only one of them did. The one holding the money, what should he do? He should give each of them 100. And the rest must remain until Elijah comes. Ad shiavo Eliyahu. What will Eliyahu do? He'll know. He'll know who was the one who actually lent 100 and who lent 200. So Eliyahu knows everything. Actually, not everything, but Eliyahu knows quite a lot. And it's not that, in this case, he'll provide the information that will enable us to identify the right person who really deserves the 200. Okay, presumably both of them will be brought back to life and we'll be able to conclude this monetary transaction. Notice Rabbi Yosef's view. He says, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. If so, what does the deceiver lose? Right, the guy who really only lent 100, he lied and said he lent 200, deposited 200, now he's still going to get back his 100. No, don't give him anything. If he lies and says that he gave the 200, he gets nothing. Actually, the other guy doesn't get it either. All of it must remain until Elijah comes. Then Eliyahu will sort things out. It's a fascinating bit of detail there. So it's very practical, specific things Elijah might do. And in a more general, universal way, he's going to herald the Mashiach. When's he actually going to come? When is Eliyahu going to show up? Beautiful teaching in the Talmud, number 6. Israel has already been assured that Eliyahu will not come on Friday afternoon. He won't come on Erev Shabbat. Okay, Erev Shabbat means a Friday or Friday night. Here we're talking about Friday during the day or Friday afternoon. Eliyahu is not going to show up right before Shabbat. He's not going to show up anytime on Friday or the eve of a festival. Why? Due to the effort required to prepare for the holy day. Sounds a little strange. What are they saying? Eliyahu won't come. What does it mean Eliyahu won't come? He won't come to do what? He won't come to announce the Mashiach. Eliyahu won't come to announce the Mashiach before Shabbat because what will people do? They'll miss out preparing for Shabbat. They'll be so eager to greet Eliyahu, they'll go out to greet Eliyahu and they won't do what they should do for Shabbat. Here's how Rashi explains it. According to Rashi, because people would abandon the necessary preparations for Shabbat and go out to greet Eliyahu. Or he says elsewhere, Rashi, because this teaching comes twice in the Talmud, because they should busy themselves with preparing the Shabbat meals. Instead, they'll busily engage with Eliyahu. And another rabbi, the Ritba, great halachic authority, the Ritba, he puts it a little differently. He lived a little bit, a couple centuries after Rashi, because Eliyahu would be putting people to the trouble of greeting him, thereby preventing them from making the necessary preparations for Shabbat. Okay, it's fairly close. What they're all saying is that Shabbat matters so much, you don't want to ruin a Shabbat just because the Mashiach has come. It's an amazing bit of rabbinic, it shows you the rabbinic mind so clearly. What matters especially is this moment. Okay, this is almost a kind of parallel between Buddhism and Judaism. What matters is this present moment. Don't think about the Mashiach. Even if Mashiach is about to come, Eliyahu is not going to ruin Shabbat for us. He's going to let us have Shabbat, and then he'll come. By the way, this helps to explain why we sing for Eliyahu at Havdalah. Why is Eliyahu there in Havdalah? Okay, we'll talk about the seder next week. But why is Eliyahu? What does he have to do with Havdalah? Well, you might say Shabbat is a taste of Mashiach, right? Shabbat is called Me'en Olam Haba, something similar to the world to come. And the Mashiach is described as Yom Shekulo Shabbat, a time that's entirely Shabbat. So there's certainly, Shabbat is a taste of Mashiach. Maybe that's why Eliyahu comes as Shabbat ends. But I think it's really more specific than that. Eliyahu won't come on Friday, we know. And actually, we also know that he may not be able to come on Shabbat. Because what's the problem? Eliyahu can't come on Friday. Could Eliyahu come on Shabbat? What's the problem? You can't travel on Shabbat. How's Eliyahu going to travel from heaven to Yerushalayim on Shabbat? Well, the Talmud actually discusses, are you allowed to travel on Shabbat more than the maximum of 2,000 cubits, right? It's about half a mile. You can travel further than that if you're in the air. The Talmud actually discusses, are you allowed to travel further if you're not on the ground? If you're above the ground a certain distance, it's not decided in the Talmud. So we're not sure whether you can travel even if you're above the ground on Shabbat. Therefore, Eliyahu is not going to come on Friday. He's not going to come on Shabbat. When we say Havdalah, we say Shabbat's over. No more excuses. Eliyahu, you have to come. That's one way of understanding why Eliyahu shows up on, let's say, Shabbat. So we know Eliyahu won't come then, but he will come eventually along with the Mashiach, or a day before the Mashiach. Let's look for a moment. Pinchas and Eliyahu.
If I could just raise a question or a point. Also, I was always taught, and I don't know if this is correct, but the word teku in the Talmud, when you can't come to a conclusion that there's not enough data, was represented the acronym of Tishbi Yitaretz Kushiot V'She'elot, that Elijah will eventually answer all questions. And so one of the other transformations could be that Elijah allows us to tolerate uncertainty, or being able to put off having the absolute answer, which is so in contrast to the way he was in the biblical Elijah.
Yes, that's fascinating. It's fascinating that term teku is remarkable. And when the last thing you said about uncertainty is beautiful, because it's such a contrast, as you indicated. In the Bible, he's the one who refuses to let anyone be uncertain. You have to take a stand. You have to make a choice. You have to make a decision. Then somehow, at least with that term teku, there's an open-endedness that's there. Remember, eventually Elijah will come and actually tell us or enable us to figure out the answer. But teku itself is amazing. That term you used, this word, Aramaic term, taf, yud, kuf, vav, teku. You could spell it in English, T-E-I-Q-U. That term appears in the Talmud exactly as you say, when a question has not been resolved. So what does it mean? Teku really means let it stand. It comes from the root kum. Tekum is really like in Hebrew, yakum or takum. Let it stand. Let what stand? Let the question stand. Let it remain open. Eventually, it was interpreted to mean what you said. The letters Taf, Yud, Kuf, Vav stand for Tishbi, the Tishbite, Eliyahu, Yavo, he'll come, Yitaretz, Tishbi, Yivaer, Yitaretz, Kushiot, Uva'ayot. Tishbi, Elijah will answer, will solve any outstanding questions or problems. So it's taken to mean that. That's a later development. It's not till medieval times. I bring in the book, a footnote in the book. If you look in the index, you have the book or get the book. the index to the book, you'll actually see teku in the index. It's the easiest way to find it. And there are different figures who first suggested that teku means that, but in the Talmud, it does not mean that. People will tell you that it means that in the Talmud. It eventually comes to mean that because of that creative wordplay, turning it into an acronym. But in the Talmud, it really means let it stand. And it fits in beautifully with a later interpretation, let it stand until Elijah will figure it out for us. Great. Let's look a little more, and we'll pause for questions again in a little bit. So number 7, Pinchas is Eliyahu. Okay, we're on page 9 now of the PDF. Actually, yeah, page 9 of the PDF. Pinchas is Eliyahu. We mentioned these are the 2 zealots, right? Eliyahu is a zealot. Pinchas was also a zealot. I don't have to go into detail, but basically, what did Pinchas do in the book of Numbers? He kills 2 people, a couple, an Israelite and a Midianite princess who are worshiping Baal, right? Like with Eliyahu. Eliyahu is fighting Baal. Pinchas is also fighting Baal. This is an earlier type of Baal. Pinchas stabs to death an Israelite and a Midianite princess who are engaged in orgiastic celebration of Baal worship. That's Pinchas's great deed in the book of Numbers, right? The Torah portion, Pinchas, named for him, comes immediately after that act. And what does God say to Pinchas? Because of your great zealotry, I am now promising that you will have the priesthood forever. Okay, so in the Torah, it's very clear that Pinchas's zealotry is totally positive and is blessed by God. Later, the rabbis are critical of him because of what we said, because of the opposition to zealots and zealotry, and specifically the zealots in Judea at the time. But look at this midrash. This is phenomenal. This is from a late midrash called Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. I'm going to start with the Hebrew just to, well, actually the Hebrew is in the English. Those of you who want can follow it in the Hebrew. I want to give us just the maximum Hebrew and English here. The Blessed Holy One revealed himself to Elijah and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? Okay, that great question we saw last week. Ma lachafo Eliyahu, what are you doing here? Right, when Elijah's at Sinai, God seems to be saying, you should be with the people, you're a prophet. Why have you run off to the desert? Why do you want to die? And what does Elijah say? Kano kineti, right? I have been so zealous. That's his answer. I've been so zealous for you, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant. Okay, this is why we call him a zealot. He actually calls himself a zealot. Kano kineti. The Blessed Holy One said to him, you're always zealous. You were zealous in Shittim on account of sexual immorality, as is said. Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, turned away my wrath from the Israelites, bikano et kinati, when he zealously enacted my zeal. Okay, by zealously enacting my zeal in their midst. So I did not annihilate the Israelites by my zeal. Okay, God would have wiped out the Israelites if Pinchas hadn't taken action right then. And here too you are zealous. So what is God saying? God is saying that Eliyahu is Pinchas. They're not 2 different zealots. They're actually the same person. God is saying, Eliyahu, you've always been so zealous. You were zealous when you were Pinchas, and now you're zealous here again with the Israelites in the time of Ahab. By your life, Israel shall not enact the covenant of circumcision until you see it with your eyes. Meaning what? Eliyahu has to show up at every Brit Milah. Eliyahu has to show up at every circumcision. Why? To prove that the Israelites have not rejected the Brit. Right? He says to God, they've rejected the Brit. God says, you think they've rejected the Brit? You show up at every bris. Right? Brit, of course, means circumcision. Brit Milah, the covenant of circumcision. So circumcision is called the covenant, the Brit, the bris. God says, you show up at every bris and you'll see the Israelites really are guarding the covenant, are preserving the covenant. It's a beautiful, beautiful midrash. But this midrash is assuming what? It's assuming that Eliyahu is Pinchas. Now that is, you'll forgive me, somewhat ridiculous. Pinchas lived around the year 1200 BCE. Eliyahu lived around the year 850 BCE. Doesn't seem possible that Pinchas lived long enough that he could just undergo a change of name and become Eliyahu. But it's remarkable, you find this character Pinchas after the Torah. Even in the Tanakh, you find Eliyahu popping up in the book of Judges, long after we would assume he passed away. So somebody at some point, we don't know who, imagined that Pinchas actually lived long enough that he became Eliyahu. That's never stated explicitly in rabbinic literature, but there are hints at it, and this is one of the clear hints, this Midrash Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. Later in the Middle Ages, this becomes a very common idea, and you actually have the phrase, Pinchas hu Eliyahu. Pinchas is Elijah, just like that. Let's continue this Midrash, because it goes on to say, this is now the Midrash, because of this, the sages instituted the practice of preparing a seat of honor for Elijah, not the Elijah, for Elijah, gratefully remembered, who's called Angel of the Covenant. As I said, and the Angel of the Covenant whom you desire, behold, he is coming. Okay, again, Malachi. Malachi actually in that same chapter, Malachi chapter 3, right? The same chapter where he says, I'm sending to you Elijah the prophet. The beginning of that chapter, Malachi mentions Malach HaBrit, the Angel of the Covenant. Now, I should say, in Malachi, it's not clear that Malach HaBrit is to be identified with Elijah. They seem to be two different figures. But the Midrash and Kabbalah assume that Malach HaBrit, the Angel of the Covenant, is Elijah. And why is he Malach HaBrit? Because he cared so much for the Brit, and he proved the victory of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh at Mount Carmel, and now he will show up at every Brit. I should say, some people actually read this Midrash as if it's saying, not that God's punishing Elijah, God is actually rewarding Elijah. God is saying, you care so much about the covenant, you are going to be gifted with celebrating every covenant of circumcision. I think that's unlikely, but there are authorities who say that, and there are actually versions of the Midrash that read that way. Sounds strange, but this was somewhat of a fluid text in the Middle Ages. You have different readings of this Midrash, and some are worded in such a way that you could see it as a reward. We're going to look at a couple more passages, and then I'll pause for some questions. Look at this. This is remarkable. Number 8 starts off just with a verse from Kings that we saw last week. 2 verses. This is after the encounter on Mount Sinai and Mount Horeb. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said to him, "Go, return on your way, and Elisha, son of Shaphat from Avel Macholah, you shall anoint as prophet." Look at the Hebrew, tachtecha. Okay, in your place. You should anoint Elisha in your place. God is basically saying, remember, Elijah asked to be killed. Elijah had a kind of death wish. Elijah wanted to die. God doesn't let him die. He takes him to Mount Sinai. He gives him the revelation, right? The wind, the earthquake, the fire, finally the sound of stillness. Then God says, go on your way, do such and such. Elijah still has things to do, but Elijah is already told that he should anoint his successor. Now look what the Midrash does to this. According to an early Midrash, and Elisha, son of Shaphat, you shall anoint as prophet in your place. The wording in your place indicates, I do not want your prophesying. This is actually in the Midrash. It's the Hebrew. Et Elisha ben Shaphat timshach l'navi tachtecha, in your place. She'ein tamud lamar l'navi tachtecha, ela she'i ifshei b'nevuatech. This is Aramaic, I don't want your nevuah. God is saying to Elijah, I no longer want your prophesying. It's time for you to anoint Elisha. You could say, taking a little bit of poetic license, this is the only time in the entire Bible that a prophet is fired. If Eliyahu is dismissed, Eliyahu is now going to be replaced something about Eliyahu is too much even for God to handle. He's too much of an extremist. Maybe he's complaining too much about himself. Now remember, this is the midrashic view. This is not necessarily the pshat. Okay, the pshat of the verse is simply God says, do this and anoint Elisha, but the rabbis are criticizing him. Look how Rashi puts it. The next, still in number 8. And Elisha, son of Shaphat, shall anoint as prophet in your place. I do not want your prophesying, since you are accusing my children. Okay, Greek term, you're becoming too much of a prosecutor. You're prosecuting my children. You're condemning my children. Elijah is too harsh. Okay, this is the rabbis coming out and saying Elijah is too harsh. And yet, what does God say about Elijah? Number 9. Let me read this one in the Hebrew and you can follow in the English. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ani mechayeh hametim, ve'Eliyahu hechayeh hametim. Ani morid hageshem, ve'Eliyahu horid geshamim. Ani otzer geshamim, ve'Eliyahu ken. Ani horati esh v'gofrit al Sodom, ve'Eliyahu horid ken. Hu chaya v'yichyeh ad techiyat hametim. Beautiful last line. Hu chaya, he lived. V'yichyeh, he will live until techiyat hametim. Okay, God is comparing Elijah to himself. We're just going to begin one passage here, Eliyahu and Kabbalah, and then we'll open it up to questions. Okay, we've just looked briefly at Eliyahu and Chazal and who he becomes. The Kabbalah, of course, is based on the Talmud and the Midrash, based on the Torah. So whatever Eliyahu has turned into at this point, the Kabbalah inherits Eliyahu. What happens to Eliyahu in Kabbalah? Basically, he becomes the embodiment of Ruach HaKodesh. He is the one who conveys inspiration to sincere spiritual seekers. Just hiding that text because I wanted to introduce it by referring to a story in the Talmud I'm sure many of you know about. The great hero Rabbi Shimon, son of Yochai. Okay, we mentioned him a little while ago. He was a student of Rabbi Akiva. He's the one who says that Eliyahu is going to come to lahashvot hamachloket, to resolve disputes. That man, Shimon ben Yochai, he got in trouble with the Romans, right? We saw that Rabbi Meir got in trouble with the Romans. His colleague, Rabbi Shimon, got in trouble with the Romans. Rabbi Shimon criticized the Romans, and the Romans were out to capture Rabbi Shimon. So Rabbi Shimon went and hid in a cave for 12 years with his son, Rabbi Elazar. They hide in that cave, and eventually, after 12 years, Eliyahu shows up. According to the Talmud, Eliyahu comes. Eliyahu doesn't actually see Rabbi Shimon. There's no contact between Eliyahu and Rabbi Shimon, but Eliyahu announces, Eliyahu says outside of the cave, who will tell Rabbi Shimon that the emperor has died, that he's now safe. The Romans are not going to look for him any longer. He can come out of the cave. Okay, so in the Talmud, Eliyahu is the one who announces that Rabbi Shimon is free to leave. Look what happens in the Zohar when the Zohar retells that story. Number 1, Elijah and the Zohar. This is a little piece from the Zohar. Rabbi Shimon, son of Yochai, fled to the wilderness of Lida. Where is Lida? Lod, right? I think most people here have been to Israel. If you've gotten to Israel, you've been to Lida. Lod is Ben Gurion Airport. So Rashbi fled to the wilderness of Lida and hid in a cave, he and his son, Rabbi Elazar. A miracle is performed for them. A carob tree sprouted up, and a spring of water gushed forth. They ate from that carob tree and drank from those waters. Elijah gratefully remembered, visited them twice a day and taught them, and no one knew. So this is remarkable. It's based on the story in the Talmud. It's retelling it, adding some elements. But the most important thing for us, what's being added, Eliyahu doesn't show up at the end. Eliyahu is there every day. Eliyahu is teaching Rabbi Shimon in the cave, which means what? that the Zohar was composed in the cave. This is the Kabbalistic legend about the Zohar itself. The Zohar was written in a cave by Rabbi Shimon, and according to this passage, it was Eliyahu who inspired the Zohar. So this, you can see how central Eliyahu is to the Kabbalah. If Eliyahu inspired the Zohar, then he is the ultimate revealer of secrets. Look at the quote at the top of this passage. What Moses was to the Torah, Elijah was to the Kabbalah. This was said by Louis Ginsburg, great scholar of Talmud and Midrash, the 20th century. I think it's a little bit of an exaggeration, perhaps, but not by much, because Elijah is the one who inspires the mystics. It's interesting, when Kabbalah emerges, we're talking now about the 12th and 13th centuries in Provence and Spain. That's where Kabbalah emerges as a full movement, as a nascent movement within Judaism. When Kabbalah emerges, the early Kabbalists are said to have experienced a revelation of Elijah, what's called in Hebrew, Gilui Eliyahu. We'll look at this more next week, but I want to just introduce the term Gilui Eliyahu, the revelation of Elijah. That happens, you could say, already in the Talmud. Rabbis meet Elijah, they study with Elijah, they have an encounter, but you don't find that term, Gilui Eliyahu, until the Middle Ages. And the early Kabbalists are said to have had that experience, which means what? Eliyahu is the one who gives new interpretations of Torah. Eliyahu enables you to discover something new in Torah. What's fascinating is that around the same time that this is happening in the Jewish world, in the Islamic world, you have great mystics who are also being inspired by Elijah. The Muslims don't always call him Elijah, they often call him Al-Khidr, which is Arabic for the green one. You could spell that Al-Khidr. Al-Khidr means the green one. Green, of course, is a most important color in Islam. It's the color of harmony. So why is Eliyahu called the green one? That's a long story. You can look at the book to find out. Basically, there's an ancient notion of someone called the green man. This is throughout many, many cultures. If you think of a tree that can walk, think of a cartoon you might have seen or that your kids now see, a tree that gets up and walks. That's an ancient mythological motif of the green man. So that notion of the green man entered Islam, as it entered many cultures, but in Islam it was identified with Elijah. So Eliyahu and the green man together become the person known as Al-Khidr. And that figure of Al-Khidr is the one who inspires the mystics, just as Eliyahu inspires the Kabbalists, just as Christian devotees were inspired by Eliyahu also. Let's pause here. I'm sure there's some questions. I'd like to first call on people who haven't gotten to speak yet. And if there's not a raised new hand, then Noah, please, if there's anything in chat, you can use that too.
Zella, go ahead.
Hi. I don't know what to do with these stories. I'm so perplexed. I mean, it's ironic. Shimon Bar Yochai was in the cave and when he came out, burnt up the fields. So exactly what is Eliyahu teaching him? I mean, he's sent back to that cave. At the very beginning, Eliyahu, when he declares the drought, I mean, there'll be innocent people who will die, but we just kind of go over that. I have so much trouble with, and then suddenly he becomes this beloved character. And what is the takeaway? How do we deal with this ignoring really problematic behavior when it doesn't, I don't know, suit the character, and then all of a sudden we're transforming and he becomes beloved?
Yeah, I think you're highlighting the reality of Eliyahu, right? Yeah. Eliyahu is not a perfect hero. Eliyahu is not a saint, right? Eliyahu becomes a saint, right? And in fact, that sounds like a Christian term. In the Christian world, Eliyahu is one of the great saints. In fact, I've heard it said, I think this is accurate, Elijah is the most revered Old Testament figure in terms of sainthood. There's no such thing as Saint Abraham or Saint Moses, at least not, it's not widespread. Saint Elias, right? That Christian name, Saint Elijah is all over the place. There's shrines to Elijah in the Christian world.
Wow.
And in fact, in the Jewish world, that might be embarrassing to some of us. There are actually shrines to Elijah that Jews go to pray, and Christians. In fact, some shrines have Jews and Christians and Muslims all praying to Elijah. The Jews are praying to Eliyahu Hanavi. The Muslims are praying to Al-Khidr. The Christians are praying to Elias. I shouldn't say praying to, say venerating. The Jews are praying at that site. Now, many of them do pray to Elijah. You're not supposed to pray to Elijah. You pray, and the presence of Elijah will help the prayer. So Jews and Christians and Muslims turned Elijah into a saint. Now, what you're saying is, wait a minute, let's look at the Bible. He declares a drought. What's going to happen? People are going to die, right? That widow in Sarfat, right? The widow on the Phoenician coast, she's about to die. In fact, Elijah himself, why does he leave the creek? Remember, he goes to that creek where he's fed miraculously. Why leave? He's brought food every day, he's given water, but there's a drought. Elijah himself suffers from the drought. Elijah suffers from his own extreme behavior. Okay, so in the Bible, let's just start with Tanakh, right? What we talked about last week. In the Bible, is Elijah positive or negative? Okay, obviously both, right? He's saving the glory of Yud-Heh-Vaveh, but he's slaughtering 450 prophets. Why doesn't he convert the prophets? Why doesn't he say, hey, I realize you made a mistake. Now I'm going to show you the truth. Okay, we're in the biblical mode where it's white and black. Eliyahu is, you make a choice. You make a choice. You can't hop between two branches. So that's Eliyahu in Tanakh. Let's just start from Tanakh. Eliyahu has a checkered personality. Eliyahu can be enraged, right? Eliyahu, he doesn't seem like a family person, right? He's the ultimate loner. What happens to Eliyahu? He becomes the most familiar person in all of Judaism. You can't do anything without Eliyahu. You can't have a seder without Eliyahu. You can't have a bris without Eliyahu. You can't have Havdalah without Eliyahu. You can't have Birkat HaMazon without Eliyahu. A traditional Jew invokes Elijah at least 3 times a day. Elijah appears in the grace after meals, right? Harachaman yishlach lanu et Eliyahu Hanavi. May the compassionate one send to us Elijah to bring the Mashiach. 3 times a day, that's said by any Orthodox Jew who eats bread. Okay, if you're gluten-free, you find some other way to talk about Eliyahu. So Elijah turns from this troubled, right, angry zealot into a saint. That's what's fascinating. What's amazing is that he never loses his humanity. He's an angel, but he's not like other angels. I haven't said yet that he's an angel, but basically, if you look at the Talmud and the Midrash, he is angelic. The Talmud actually has a beautiful line at the beginning of the Talmud. It says, Michael can reach his destination in one swoop, in one glide. How long does it take the angel Michael to get from heaven to earth? 1 glide. Gabriel takes him 2 glides. Elijah, it takes him 4. Okay, so he's an angel. He's not quite as powerful as Michael and Gabriel. He's an angel, but he's an angel who retains some of his human qualities. For example, one rabbi comes to Elijah. One rabbi meets with Elijah. Remember I said Elijah will stop meeting with a rabbi if he does something wrong? So one rabbi was meeting with Elijah. Elijah stopped meeting with him. Eventually, Elijah showed up again. The rabbi said, how come you didn't come to meet with me? Elijah said, because you called me impatient. What does the rabbi say? Hey, look who's being impatient. It's actually in the Talmud. It's a Talmudic joke, right? Elijah says, you called me impatient. The rabbi says, you're showing us right now you are impatient. So Elijah's impatience, Elijah doesn't know everything, right? He doesn't know exactly when, even Elijah doesn't know when the Mashiach will come. So my point is, you're right to be upset about smoothing over the negative, okay? the main point I'm trying to make is that Eliyahu becomes so important because he still is flawed. Because he's flawed, he's able to help us. He's a great teacher because he's flawed. He can bring the Mashiach because he's flawed. So it's in exactly that frustration, I think. You know, what, in other words, Eliyahu, according to one teaching, Eliyahu is as close to God as you can get. One Kabbalah says that, but the impatience and the humanness is there too. Aviva, please.
I'm struck by the contrast between Eliyahu's transformation and Jacob's transformation. That Jacob goes through many, many steps, including the wrestling with the angel and atoning to some degree for what he did to Esau. So, and I've been studying about Jacob with Rabbi Silber. So there you see Jacob's transforming. And the title of this class, I thought we were going to see how Eliyahu himself transforms, but from everything you've cited, he doesn't transform. It's other people who said, we're going to change how we look at him. And it seems to me arbitrary. Why him and why not another figure in the Bible?
Yeah, a lot of interesting things you're saying. Yaakov, I think this applies to him too, right? The biblical heroes are so powerful because they're flawed, right? Yaakov is clearly flawed, so his name is a heel. He's a real heel, right? And what he goes through, he turns from Yaakov to Israel. Yeah, this might have been a little misleading with Eliyahu. Basically, you could look at the biblical material itself and see some development, right? You can. The compassion is certainly there at a very early point, right? He's compassionate with the widow and he revives the widow's child. But then his harshness, seems to dominate because of the situation, because he feels the Israelites have strayed. So the transformation we're talking about, you could really describe it two ways. You could say the rabbis bring about a tikkun. The rabbis want to mend this harsh figure. But you could see it differently. You could see a little more imaginatively, a little more poetically, that Elijah is gradually learning to change himself. And that takes centuries. In other words, that is going on from the time of the Bible to Malachi. Malachi he's already changing. He's already different. Before we get to the rabbis, he's already in heaven available. Right? For Malachi, he's already available. So Eliyahu has become available. You could compare him for a moment to Enoch. I think I mentioned this last week, right? Enoch goes up to heaven, but he never comes down. Elijah goes up to heaven and he can't wait to come down. So that transformation is happening, and you could look at it critically and say, look what the rabbis do and they change him, but I want to see it that way. I want to see the development. And then I want to also see Eliyahu gradually learning to love. And that the root of that is there in Kings, but it takes a long time for the stories about him to develop that, to bring that out.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Chaim, please.
Is there perhaps an allusion to this tension between absolute zealotry and something else that that other side of Elijah and Pinchas, in that in the Bible he's given Brit Shalom. It's kind of Elijah is a complex character, as Pinchas is a complex character, absolutely zealous, but also the progenitor of peace, or lahashvot machloket. So I see actually the humanity in this tension, and his ability to see that he can't be in this world, and he's got to give it over to it's not that he's been fired, but he recognizes he has to give it over to somebody who's a little better at dealing with the real world.
Yes, yes. No, that's beautiful. That's beautiful how you put it. The Zohar actually puts it very, very similar terms. Let's see if I can find it quickly here. Yeah, no, I think it may be in a longer selection I have. But yes, you could see that development happening. Did you have a specific? What did you want me to respond to specifically?
Well, it's the sense that the transformation is the evolution of what's there. That they're both Elijah, and that in later in both the Talmud and Kabbalah, they're picking up on that other aspect of that Brit Shalom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that Shalom is there. You know, it's interesting. As we said, the Torah is totally positive about Pinchas, right? Because of what he did, because of that zealous act, because of that killing, God says, "I'm giving you Shalom." So right there, you have the amazing contrast. Because of his violent act, he has Brit Shalom. It's interesting, and I'm sure you know this in the Torah. That word Brit Shalom, I think it's the only time in the entire Bible the Vav is cut. The Vav is cut in the middle. Okay, you won't see this in all Chumashim, but look at any Torah scroll or a Tikkun or many texts will have it. The Vav is cut in the middle. It's called Vav Kitu'ah. I don't think it happens anywhere else in the Bible. And the one interpretation of that is there was something missing. There was something imperfect. There was something extreme. There was something too extreme in Pinchas's behavior. So the rabbis criticized both of them, but the identification of Pinchas and Eliyahu is fascinating too. I think we probably have to stop in a moment or two. If there's one quick question, maybe we can take it. Noah, you can call on someone, or we can conclude right here.
I think we are going to have to
Great.
say goodbye for now because we do have another class immediately after this.
Sure.
Dr. Dror Bondi, and folks are welcome to join that.
Great.
Thank you again, Professor Matt, for a tremendous class, and to each of you here for being part of our learning community. Your contributions really enrich the whole experience. Wonderful. As you probably know by now, we have over a dozen classes during our Elul Zman. I'd like to mention in particular, there's also a class before this now with Dr. Hanan Gosney. You can see the first class on our Facebook page. The recording's up, and join for next week. And he's a brilliant thinker. I mean, all of the classes are quite good. And we look forward to seeing you. And you can find out more and register for more, of course, at elul.drisha.org. And please be well. Hope to see you soon.
Great. Shalom. Good to be with you.